Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in once again to Queen Ahmadiyyah TV, More Than Meets the Third Eye. I'm your host, QueenAShakur, and this is your spiritual vitamins. So as you're coming in, please go ahead and like and share this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so. All right. Be sure to click the notification bell and click the word all so you're notified each time the Queen Goddess goes live. All right. Juju said the Queen is queening. Thank you, beloved. Okay, so shout out to all of my Stardusters in the chat. Now, here's the thing. It's storming here. So hopefully we don't have any interruptions, okay? Because sometimes when it storms, you all know the lights may go out or something like that. But so let's get ready to get into it. Lights up, everyone. Please like and share. Okay, so I told you all yesterday we're going to talk about the Salem witch trials because you see, what people don't really talk about in history and what we're not taught in school when we're taught about this, they never tell us about the Black people who were first accused, Black women to be precise. And these Black women were working for Puritans who were their slave owners. Okay, they don't tell you anything about this. And these women were doing their regular spiritual practices, okay, that they got from their own countries. They weren't practicing witchcraft. Now, some of the Puritans were, in fact, practicing witchcraft, okay? And then when these what happened was when this thing started with this frenzy of people pointing the fingers and making accusations of other people doing witchcraft and all of that, a lot of it was done supposedly for spite. There were disputes over land and things like that. And so people were pointing the fingers at each other, but mainly they blamed it on the Black people. Okay, that's usually how it goes throughout history. Isn't that how it all starts? Okay, so please like and share, everyone. And I'm going to play this video for you because this guy on TikTok gave a very good synopsis of it all. But not only Tituba, the woman from Barbados that I spoke to you all about, I believe I spoke to you about her yesterday, but there was also a woman named Candy and a woman named Mary Black who also were accused. Okay, so let's get into it. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play this video. Yes, it is sad, beloved, absolutely. So the first thing I'm going to do, and here's the thing, I want you to pay attention to how our people were demonized and victimized for their spiritual practices, but at the same time, the people who victimized them and demonized them used their spiritual practices, and they still use it till this day. The thing is that they'll tell you that it's occult practices. They'll tell you that it's witchcraft and sorcery so that you won't use it. And many of our people fall for it. But at the end of the day, the same people who will tell you that it's something bad and you shouldn't use it will absolutely use it against you. Okay. And in fact, throughout history, it is not people who look like me that are the ones most likely to engage in witchcraft. And I'm not saying that some people who look like me don't, but witchcraft didn't come from our people. Okay, at the end of the day. And it is also a known fact that in the United States, right now in 2024, there are thousands upon thousands of witches, covens of witches. And those people do not look like us. Okay, there have been people that have come out and spoken about it. And with that all been said, let's get into it. I'm going to go ahead and play this video, and then we'll talk more about it after the fact. All right, likes up, everyone, please like and share. Thank you in advance, beloveds.
Welcome to another episode of You Gonna Learn Today. On this episode, we're talking about Tituba, the Black woman who started the Salem witch trials. Let's go. Most of us are familiar with the Salem witch trials. We've all been told hyperbole regarding some accusations of witches and some being burned at the stake. It turns out this is not true, and yet there is another little known fact that has been rarely mentioned in history books. The Salem witch trial started over a Black woman. This is the story of a woman named Tituba, the Black Witch of Salem, Massachusetts. Mass hysteria broke out in Salem in 1692 over claims of witchcraft and Satanism. The first person to be accused of association with the occult was an Afro-Indian woman named Tituba. Tituba was originally from Barbados and was an ethnic mix of Black Africans and Arawak Indian, according to historians like Samuel Drake. She was enslaved in Barbados on the Thompson Plantation. Slave transport documents show that she was inherited by Samuel Parris, who brought her to Massachusetts. Tituba was married to an indigenous man named John Indian, as verified by the church record book kept by her owner, Samuel Parris. Tituba was the first person to be accused of practicing witchcraft by two white women, Elizabeth Parris and Abigail Williams. Tituba had a close relationship with Elizabeth Parris because she was the daughter of her owner, Samuel Parris. Tituba used voodoo as spiritual practice for divination and healing. She began to teach Elizabeth some of these practices before being accused of using black magic. After being arrested, Tituba was scheduled for trial. In an interview with Robert Caliph for his collection of papers on the trials, titled More Wonders of the Invisible World, being an account of the trials of several witches lately executed in New England, Tituba confirmed that Parris had beaten a confession out of her and then coached her on what to say and how to say it when she was questioned. After she was tortured, Tituba confessed to practicing witchcraft, which included worshiping and speaking to the devil. Tituba attempted to explain her voodoo to the hyper-religious group of Puritans. They, ironically, claimed to America to practice their version of religion without persecution from the Roman Catholic Church. Tituba repeatedly asserted that she was not a witch, but to no avail, even though there was no proof that she used any magic for harm. Tituba was sent to jail in Boston to await trial and punishment on March 7, 1692. Tituba's knowledge of voodoo, position in society as an enslaved person, and gender and ethnic background served as the basis for her being the primary scapegoat of the mass hysteria among the Puritans. By being at the intersection of these discriminatory factors, it was easy to convince the people that she worshiped the devil and practiced demonology. Here is another example of Black and indigenous spiritual practices being demonized by white communities. In all, 30 people were found guilty of witchcraft, and 19 people were executed by hanging, the majority of them being Black. Tituba, the Black Witch of Salem, spent 13 months in prison before being sold to another slaver. Now you know.
Okay. So as I said, he gave a very good telling of the facts of that. Okay, please pay attention. Gifted 5 Queen. Oh, thank you, beloved. Thank you, Locked Vegan. I appreciate you, beloved. So Locked Vegan has gifted 5 memberships. Thank you, beloved. I really appreciate you. Now, so that all being said, you see how that goes? You see how they demonized our spiritual practices, and Black people lost their lives because of it. Now, the real people who were doing the witchcraft were the people who didn't look like them. Okay. And at the end of the day, you heard how he said they had left their home country and come here so that they could practice in peace without being, obstructed by the Roman Catholic Church. Okay. So, like I said, this is something that has been common throughout history, where Black people have absolutely taken the blame for things of which they had nothing to do with. And Tituba did confess, but it was because she was beaten into confessing. And when you think about it, isn't that what happens till this day when Black people are accused of things that they absolutely didn't do, and then they confess, and it's all because they were beaten into submission, like the Central Park 5 and many others, I'm sure. Okay, so just please pay attention. Now, with that all being said, let's talk about 2 other women. Okay, remembering Candy and Mary Black, who were also accused during the Salem witch trials of, in fact, being witches. Okay, so let's get into it. Likes up, everyone, please like and share. Okay, here we go. Now, the Salem witch trials of 1692 involved a number of individuals identified as key players in the series of events that formulate the greater witch trials narrative. One such figure is Tituba. Now, the enslaved woman who was the first person accused of practicing witchcraft and afflicting the young girls living in the household of her enslaver, Samuel Paris. Now, a person of color whose ethnicity has been disputed and debated for many years. Tituba is often regarded as the sole non-white individual who took part in the trials. But however, 2 lesser-known enslaved Black women also found themselves embroiled in the history of America's most famous witch trials. Candy, an Afro-Barbadian woman originally from Barbados, resided in Salem town under the ownership of Margaret Hawkes. Now, as there are no prior records to illustrate otherwise, both women likely managed to remain detached from the trials until becoming formally accused of practicing witchcraft on July the 1st of 1692. And their accuser was John Putnam Jr., as well as Thomas Putnam. So according to the existing official complaint, both Candy and her enslaver were accused of tormenting Mary Walcott, Mary Warren, and Ann Putnam Jr. Through means of using magic, black magic. Now, under interrogation several days later, on July the 4th, Candy revealed that Hawkes, which was her owner, made her a witch and forced her to sign her name in the devil's book. Now, in essence, Candy confessed to being a witch despite shifting blame to her enslaver and vehemently denying being a witch in her home country. So upon further investigation, the inquisitive magistrates pressed the now admitted witch for proof as to how she tormented and afflicted. Now, a deputy escorted Candy back to her home, whereupon she returned to the court with several rags and herbs acting as puppets, which are dolls made to represent a person for spells to be cast on them. Now, I want you all to remember something. You know, I have talked to you all about voodoo before, and as I've told you, voodoo can be used for something good or something bad. It's all about the intention, okay? And with that all being said, think about how they used it during the Haitian Revolution in 1804 to defeat their oppressors, right? So in that case, they used it as a way to protect themselves. Now, in this story, Some of these people were practicing voodoo because that was what they learned in their country. And at the end of the day, they weren't using it for nefarious things. Now, what happens is, I want to say this too. I forgot. Also, you know how we see these stories and movies produced in Hollywood where they talk about people using voodoo dolls and they have these little dolls that like pin cushions and they stick things in them and all of that. Well, that didn't come from Black people. That was never an official voodoo practice. Okay, that came from people who don't look like us, who made these things and put it into Hollywood. These things were called puppets and they were used in whatever the Puritans were doing. Okay, so please pay attention. So she says that they have these puppets that they use to inflict, injury upon someone. Don't think that that came from her, because that's not where it initially came from. Okay, so let me continue. And everyone, please don't forget to like and share. Now, she brought these dolls in and said they were made to represent a person for spells to be cast on them. The magistrates experimented with these tools of sorcery and were allegedly able to harm the inflicted girls by burning the dolls and holding them underwater. Due to her admission, along with now apparently tangible means of practicing witchcraft, Candy was indicted and then placed in jail. Now, at a later unknown date, despite the charges and perceived pieces of evidence against her, she was found not guilty and released from prison. A verdict of not guilty seems surprising given the circumstances, but as a slave, Candy held no property or any social sway that could otherwise that may have otherwise been an enticing reason for her to be found guilty. So perhaps as her enslaver is referred to as Miss Hawks, rather than Good Wife Hawks, an indication of high social status. You know, back then they'd call you Good Wife, like if your last name was Bush, they'd call the women Good Wife Bush. That means that you were a good person and you were upstanding and you had some type of social status. If they didn't call you that and they just called you by your name, Miss Bush, then you may have been someone who was looked down upon like a lower ranking person in the society or in their community. Okay, so they say the woman was considered too respectable to have herself. If the person was in high status, then they would be someone who is considered too respectable to have their self or their associates or servants to be servants of the devil. Now, whatever the case may be, only speculation is left because we don't have all of the information. So with that all being said, they're implying that Candy was let go and freed. Now, people have disputed this and said that these Black women were not let go and freed, okay, that they were in fact burned at the stake, or in some cases crushed, had their bodies crushed, because there was one man by the name of Giles. I think his name is Giles Corey. Now, Giles Corey was accused of witchcraft. They laid him out on the ground on a piece of wood. Okay, and they placed stones upon him one after the other until his body was crushed. And they asked him repeatedly, "Are you a witch? Have you made a pact with Satan?" And as more as he denied it, then they kept putting the stones on him until he was dead. And this is the thing. It was almost a catch-22, because you are damned if you did and damned if you don't. Because here's what they would say. They would say to one of the accused that if you're not a witch, then you should be able to quote the scripture. And so they would tell them to quote the Lord's Prayer. When they started quoting the Lord's Prayer, and in fact quoted it correctly, you'd think that they let them off because they just said, if you're not a witch, you can say it, right? That wouldn't be the case, because anytime one of them quoted the scripture correctly, then one of the accusers would say, "Oh no, look, I see someone whispering in their ear." That's what they would say. They would act like they see some malevolent entity or deity whispering the words in the person's ear. So that was their excuse. Then they would say, "We're going to put you in a sack and hog tie you and throw you into the river or the lake. If you float, that means you're a witch. So then we're going to take you and hang you. If you sink, that means you're not a witch." But here's the thing. Once they sank, they drowned because they're hogtied and they're inside of a bag to which they can't get out. Okay, so the people lost their lives regardless. So, like I said, it was damned if you do and damned if you don't. And if we're supposed to believe by the people who tell this story that don't look like us, if we're supposed to believe that Black women were accused first of being witches, but they let them go, and then they drowned or hanged or burned at the stake people like Mary, Becky, and Kate. Well, that's not how it went. Okay. That's just the narrative that has been put out. Please pay attention. Okay. So I absolutely think that Candy and Mary Black lost their lives. But let me continue. Now, a second enslaved woman, Mary Black, was also accused of witchcraft in 1692. Mary's surname indicates that she was of African descent. You see, because back then your surname went along with how you were described. For example, if you were a blacksmith, okay, then your last name would be Blacksmith. That's where the name Smith comes from to this day because it got shortened. Okay, or if your father's name was John, and then your last name would become John's son because you were the son of John. Okay, so by the fact that her name was Mary Black, it is, they are saying that says that she was basically of African descent because she was Black. Okay, that's how they did it back then. But let's continue. So, says in 1692, she was enslaved in the household of one of the leaders of Salem village, and that was Nathaniel Putnam. Now, though his family played an integral role in the witch trials from the very beginning, Nathaniel himself remained skeptical as to the validity of the witchcraft claims early on in the trials. That means that he didn't really think there was witchcraft being done. Okay, he was skeptical of it. All right, now, goes on to say that Mary Black was accused of being a witch and arrested April the 21st of 1692, along with several others, including Sarah Wilds, Sarah and Edward Bishop, Mary Easty, and William and Deliverance Hobbs. Now, the reason for the arrest of these individuals on the surviving arrest warrant is listed as high suspicion of witchcraft performed on Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, Mary Walcott, based on a complaint by John Buxom and Thomas Putnam. Now, on the day following her arrest, Mary Black was examined by the Reverend Samuel Parris, who recorded the event. Notably, throughout her examination, the present afflicted girls would cry out and claim that she had bewitched them. Black denied such allegations firmly and stated that she had no knowledge of who harmed the girls. When asked to repin her neckcloth, not totally dissimilar to a cravat or ascot in modern terms, some of the afflicted, including Mercy Lewis, Mary Walcott, and Abigail Williams, claimed that the woman pricked them and drew blood. So they're saying that when she was moving her little neck piece around, that she was doing something to them. Okay, even though people couldn't see her physically doing it, they just took their word for it. Now, the transcript from the examining Reverend Parris supports this claim, but also notes that Mary Black maintained that she had no part in the affliction, despite her claims of innocence following the examination and cries of the bewitched. Well, she was indicted and imprisoned. Now, after spending months in prison in January of 1693, Mary Black was brought to trial. Despite the fervor that brought her to court in the first place, no one appeared to testify against her when the time came. This lack of obstruction against a possible not guilty verdict did in fact lead to her release by the end of the month. There is no singular certain explanation as to why she faced no opposition on the day of her trial, but several potential reasons. Predominantly speaking, they say the support of witch trials began to wane near the end of the previous year, with orders such as spectral evidence being no longer admissible in court. Now, the official dissolution of the Court of Oyer and Terminer and the prohibiting of further witch-related arrest, okay, that had all stopped. Additionally, as her enslaver was regarded as an important figure in Salem village who did not accuse her of witchcraft himself because he didn't believe in it, okay, he thought it was not really serious and he didn't believe the claims. They say perhaps accusations that could be made in retaliation against Nathaniel Putnam no longer seems opportune in the current climate. Now, little is known as to what became of Candy following her release from prison. There are no records to confirm or deny if she returned to the home of Margaret Hawks after claiming that the woman forced her to become a servant of Satan and taught her to use witchcraft, or there's nothing to suggest that her enslaver may have chosen to sell her to another individual like the fate that befell Tituba. That wouldn't be far-fetched. Now, Mary Black, in contrast, is shown through documentation as having her jail fees paid by Nathaniel Putnam and being retrieved by him upon her release from prison. She likely lived out the remainder of her life under his ownership, as she too disappeared from the records recording her she disappeared from the records following her release from jail. Now, here's the thing. Because they're Black women, if that's why it was black magic, says Laverne. Okay. Frieza says, look who's attacking their own people, specifically Black men, using the craft against brothers for the oppressors. And they got sisters turning on us while they push mixed relationships, DNA hustling. Okay, I'm not sure what that has to do with the topic, beloved. Okay, Reggie says, I'm not buying that with an EBT card. I'm not either. Okay, Laverne said, that makes no sense. No, it makes none whatsoever. So here's the thing. Now, a lot of these people that were making accusations, as I said, they were making these claims because there were neighbors that they were having property disputes with. And then what would happen is, in reality, what was happening is a lot of these people that were being accused, they would then blame it on their slaves. Another thing is how this whole thing got started where Tituba was accused is because Abigail Williams and about 3 or 4 other young ladies, they were out in the forest dancing naked, doing a ritual, okay? And they got caught because somebody walked up and saw them and accused them of witchcraft. Now, what happened was they came home, and when they were asked by one of the girls' fathers, oh, who taught you this? Where did you learn this? They lied and said Tituba. That's what they said. They said Tituba taught them that and had them out there doing those things, dancing in the woods, naked with a fire and doing these incantations and things. Tituba had not taught them that. Tituba was teaching them spirituality. What they were, in fact, doing was witchcraft, okay, as what we would call it today. But that had nothing to do with Tituba. But of course, again, it's always blamed on Black people. So that's what they said. These girls were like 14, 15, and 16 years old. Okay. And Abigail Williams was nefarious because she was, in fact, in love with a man by the name of John Proctor, who had a wife named Sarah. And she had been messing around with that man, having an affair. And so she was angry because his wife found out and had him to fire her. So once she was fired, she had a vendetta. And then she ended up accusing Sarah and John Proctor of being witches themselves. And they ended up being some of the people that were hanged. Meanwhile, Abigail was the one doing the witchcraft because she was trying to cast spells on John and Sarah Proctor. Okay. And like I said, when they got caught, they blamed it on Tituba. Now, Tituba was beaten into a confession, but what she was doing, and she was not practicing any sort of witchcraft. That's the thing. Okay, somebody said so nefarious. It absolutely is. Okay, it absolutely is. Please pay attention. Reggie said, who knows why liars lie? Exactly. Okay, December said they've been lying on Blacks. Yes. Okay, Reggie says the show Salem was based on those two. I've never seen that show. I'll have to check it out. Thank you, beloved. And here's the thing. One of the things that they were doing to the people who were accused is they would tell them to confess and then, we'll let you live. But with Sarah and John Proctor, they didn't want to confess because they weren't witches. Abigail lied on them too, just like she lied on Tituba. And so the thing is, once they realized that they were going to die, and they didn't want to die. They had children to live for. So they agreed that they would admit, confess to being witches, even though they weren't. But what happened was once they confessed, that wasn't good enough for the court. So now the court doesn't just want you to confess. We want you to write it out in your own handwriting, or we'll write it out and we want you to sign it in your own handwriting. Sign the confession, and we're going to nail it to the church door for everyone to see. Now, mind you, these people were deeply entrenched in their religion, many of them. And so, of course, them admitting that they had conspired against God and made pacts with the devil, engaged in nefarious practices of witchcraft, trying to inflict harm and pain on others when they really didn't. So they couldn't bear to do that. And so Sarah and John Proctor, took it upon themselves to just say, we can't do that, because they felt that doing that, admitting that they were in alliance with Satan, would be turning their back on God. And they had already felt bad enough about even confessing in the first place just to live. So they ended up dying because they didn't want to come out and say, and have everyone think that they made a pact with the devil. So they ended up being hung. Okay. A lot of these people were killed for no reason, just because a few certain people chose to tell lies. And as you heard in the first video, many of those people were Black. Okay, out of the people that died during the Salem witch trials, many of these people were Black, and the white folk that were killed, some of them were not even witches. The real witches, Abigail and the rest of them, they didn't get killed because they lied on everyone else. And as soon as they would see someone's about to get off, because this person's able to say the Lord's Prayer without pausing or stopping or stumbling over their words, then they'd say, look there, there's a man. He's whispering in her ear. There's a Black man. He's telling her the words. That's exactly what they would say. Now, have any of you read The Crucible? Once in the chat, if you ever read the story, The Crucible, because I read that, I believe, when I was in high school. Has anyone read that story? Once in the chat. Because we had to read that in school. No one had to read that. I find it all interesting. So we had to read that in school. And also later, there was a movie that came out called The Crucible. Okay, now the movie was pretty good, but the thing about the movie is they didn't really show the Black people that were killed. They did have Tituba. They had someone playing the role of Tituba in the movie. But, and here's the thing. They say that the reason Tituba wasn't killed is because Tituba confessed. Okay. They said she confessed, and so that's why she wasn't killed. I don't know if she was killed or not, because like I said, some of these stories, they twist them to paint their own narratives. But Mary and Candy, or Candy, I absolutely believe she was killed, because there's no record of her after she was put in prison or in jail. And then the other young woman, Mary Black, the only reason she wasn't killed is because the owner, her slave owner, he didn't believe it in the first place, and that's why he went and bailed her out. And also another thing is, the people that accused Mary Black were upset with her owner. Okay, and so that may be why they lied on her. And Love always said Blair Witch Projects. Okay, so Locked Vegan said you saw the movie. Okay, right. So that was a good movie, I'm sure you know. And so with that all being said, this just goes to show, as I've told you, how our spiritual practices have often been demonized. And you have some of our own people that are afraid to engage in things that our ancestors absolutely used. Another thing you have to remember is they would always call it witchcraft when the slaves were doing something that they were taught in their home country, because they were afraid that if these slaves start using this against us, well, they can just do whatever they want to. They can, because they had the power to speak things and make them happen. Now, if you've seen those pictures, I'm sure you've seen the pictures of the Black slave women with the metal things over their mouths. Let me see if I can find a picture of that real quick. Likes up, everyone, please like and share. Thank you in advance. They had these iron things over their mouths. Let me just pull this up real quick. Here we go, right here. A prime example of the nefariousness. Now, why do you think they had to wear these things on their faces? Let me share my screen. Stacy said, I've seen those pictures, Queen Ahmadiyyah. Absolutely. Now, you see that? That's what they would put over their mouths. And, they would say nowadays, they would say, oh, well, they put that on their mouths so they could, and they would have a thing inside of it that pierces your tongue if you even open your mouth. Pay attention. Listen to this. For her beauty, Anastasia Escrava was forced to wear an iron muzzle over all her life in Brazil. Now, you may have seen the iconic image of this masked woman, but probably have not been able to locate the history behind it. She is called Escrava Anastasia, an enslaved African woman who lived in Brazil in the 19th century. Known for possessing great beauty, accompanied with her piercing blue eyes, Anastasia was worshipped in Brazil as a saint and heroine, according to folklore and culture of Rio de Janeiro. So she had to wear this over her mouth. Now, the thing is, as I told you, they had these things inside of it that would prick the tongue. Now, she has since gained a cult following, particularly among the descendants of slaves and the poor in Brazil. But how did this masked woman become such an influential figure in Black history within the culture of Rio de Janeiro? The story of her life varies, but the popular one linked to Delminda, a Black woman from the Bantu tribe originating in about 2000 BCE in southern Nigeria and Cameroon, who was the daughter of the royal family of Galanga, brought to Brazil in 1740 with a cargo of 112 slaves. Now, Delminda was raped by her white owner and was sold to Joaquina Pompey while she was pregnant with Anastasia. Now, Delminda gave birth to Anastasia on March the 5th, around the first half of the 19th century. She was one of the first Black female slaves to be born with blue eyes. Anastasia grew up to be extremely beautiful, with many always admiring her on the plantation. Her owner's son, Joaquin Antonio, even got obsessed with her. The white women eventually became jealous of her and convinced Joaquin to make her wear the slave mask. Now, since Anastasia was refusing the advances of Joaquin, he raped her and made her wear the iron mask for the rest of her life as a form of punishment. Now, she was forced to live with the mask, only removing it once a day to eat. She lived for some years and was subjected to several other inhumane treatments before the metal from the mask became poisonous and she ended up dying from tetanus. Legend says that before she died, she forgave her owners for the torture she received from them. She was said to have had some magical healing powers and even healed her owner's son of a serious disease. So she had magical healing powers. So what other kind of powers do you think she had? What other kind of powers do you think she had? You see, here's the thing. They didn't just make her wear that mask as a form of punishment. The part of the story that they conveniently leave out is they made her wear that mask so she couldn't cast spells on them, to free herself and other slaves. That's what they made many of them do. And some stories you'll hear that they made them wear this so that while they're out in the fields, they couldn't steal the corn and eat it themselves. That's what they'd say. But here's the thing. If in fact they were wearing these masks that had spikes on the inside so that if they opened their mouth with it on, it would prick their tongues, why would they need to do all of that to prevent them from eating? They could have just put the mask on them, right? But no, they had it to prick their tongue if they said anything. So even if you try to mumble the words, okay, to cast a spell on them, that's what would happen to you. Okay, so please pay attention. But then when they needed a healing, they would let them take the mask off. And hey, come and heal Johnny. Come and heal Amy or Beth. That's what they make them do. Okay, they let them take it off long enough to do that and then eat once a day. Isn't that something? What type of inhumane mess is this? But these are the stories that you don't hear. And then when you do hear them, they've been skewed to paint a whole nother narrative and look as though nothing nefarious was really going on. Nothing to see here, folks. Okay, that's how that goes. Stacy said, I would not forgive them. Well, most of us wouldn't today, but you have to realize that back in those days, our people who were enslaved, and specifically those who were born into slavery, like Anastasia, you know, all they knew is what they had been indoctrinated to know, beloved. They didn't have all of the information from their own tribes or their own culture because they had been born into bondage. And those of them who came into bondage knowing about their spiritual practices, they would sometimes pass it down. You know, they'd have to sneak, of course, and pass it down. But if they got caught practicing any of this stuff, you already know what happened to them. Okay, so this is also nefarious. Mr. Elevation said using and abusing us. Absolutely. And then let's not forget how beautiful she supposedly was. And then she was born with blue eyes. You can only imagine how the people who didn't look like her were hating and jealous. And then the slave owner angry and upset because she didn't want to have relations with him. And don't think that he only raped her once. He raped her repeatedly, as many times as he liked. But his torturing of her by putting that mask on her and other wicked things that he did, well, that was all basically, just because she wasn't willing to do the things that he wanted her to do, that he had to force himself upon her. Okay, which was the case with many of these African women. And when you think about the story of Thomas Jefferson, right, and the woman that he was raping, Sally, if you remember, Oprah Winfrey talked about that on her show, and she had the nerve to call the woman his mistress. That's what she said, his mistress. How are you a mistress when someone is making you have relations with them? And they know they have a wife, but at the end of the day, they're forcing themselves on you because they own you, unfortunately. That's not a mistress. Oprah is so ignorant, but people think she is so smart. Okay, please pay attention. All right. Stacy said they still hate on us. Yes, absolutely. Some really do. Terry Hartfield said she was stunning. Stacy says exactly. Okay, so with that all been said, like I told you, this is the part of the history of the Salem witch trials that they don't tell you. There are so many things that we still don't know about our own history. So many things that they have covered up and so many lies that have been told. Okay. So with that all been said, Mr. Elevation said Jefferson had babies in handcuffs. Yes, absolutely. And a lot of these slave owners had their own babies that they handcuffed when they were raping these women. And these women would bear their children. Those children would still be slaves. They'd still have them out there in the fields. They didn't care. Okay. And that's how that was. So anyway, these people were not voluntarily doing these things. It was forced upon them. And then they were demonized even further when they would engage in their own spiritual practices and be called witches. And then when other people were actually doing real witchcraft, they'd blame it on them, which I find absolutely egregious, as I told you. But anyway, there was something I wanted to read you all. Hold on for a second, please. Let me see if I can find this article real quick. Because as I told you, there was a woman that came out years ago who absolutely said that there was generational witches in her family. And here's what it says. Some American witches come from families that have practiced witchcraft for generations. Okay, this is exactly what she said. For example, Scottish, Irish, and English settlers who arrived in Appalachia combined their traditional practices. And this was based with the wisdom of the German settlers. Okay, and this was witchcraft. And like I said, when they would get caught doing this, they'd blame it on the African slaves. Okay, please pay attention. They blame it on someone of African descent. Okay, this is the same thing as paganism. Paganism and witchcraft, same thing. Why paganism and witchcraft are making a comeback. Please pay attention. Now, this is an article from 2022. And here's the thing. It's not making a comeback. It never went anywhere. It never went anywhere. It's just now being more talked about. And here are the people who engage in it. Please pay attention. The same people engaging in it today are the same people who engaged in it in 1692. The same people who engage in it today are the same exact people who engaged in it, in fact, in 1692. Okay, so please pay attention. Now, says 2 weeks ago in a run-up to Halloween, I visited Salem, Massachusetts for the first time since the pandemic began. In renewing my annual Halloween pilgrimage, I was bowled over by what I found in the Witch City. Bigger crowds, longer lines, and a wider and welcome array of merchandise geared toward many different religious traditions and ethnic identities. All nefarious. Now, amid the curious crowds in black capes and comical hats, bags overflowing with DIY, which is do-it-yourself, spell kits and candles to enhance prosperity, I overheard the same question. Is magic really real? Is witchcraft really real? For me, the answer is yes. I am one of a million plus Americans, whether proudly, secretly, or dabbling through the power of consumerism, practice some form of witchcraft. You see, witchcraft, which includes Wicca, paganism, folk magic, and other New Age traditions, is one of the fastest growing spiritual paths in America. Now, I want you to pay attention, because these devils who engage in this absolutely try to act like it's a part of spirituality. You see, that's why some Christians think that when we're practicing spirituality, that we're doing witchcraft. We're not. They're not the same thing. But these people want to act like it's the same thing so that they don't get so demonized and vilified. That's what that is. Okay. Paganism, folk magic, this New Age stuff, the Wicca and all of that has nothing to do with spirituality. That is what they're doing. It's dark and black magic. All right. Now, in 1990, Trinity College in Connecticut estimated there were 8,000 adherents of Wicca. And 2008, the U.S. Census Bureau figure was about 342,000. A 2014 Pew Research Center study increased that projection several times over in assessing that 4% of Americans identified as pagan, Wiccan, or New Age. Most modern pagan worship, of which Wicca is one type, draws on pre-Christian traditions in revering nature. By 2050, it said the number of Americans practicing other religions, faiths outside of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism would triple due largely to switching into other religions such as Wicca and pagan religions, i.e. paganism. So all these people they're predicting by 2050 are going to be doing witchcraft. Just think about it. It'll really be Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay. Babylon. Now, the precise number of witches in America is difficult to determine because many practitioners are solitary and either by choice or circumstance do not openly identify as witches because they know it's frowned upon. That's why. Okay. Goes on to say, but the growth is evident, especially to those who've made it their life's work to study the community. It's clearly increasing, says Helen A. Berger, who spoke to me on the phone last week. This is what the author is saying. Berger is one of the foremost academic experts on contemporary witchcraft and paganism in America and draws knowledge about its appeal from surveys that she's co-conducted on the pagan community. So they have communities of these people. Please pay attention. All right. Please pay attention. So it goes on to say that Wicca began to be practiced in America more in the 1960s by feminists, environmentalists, and those seeking non-structured spirituality, according to Berger. It was a largely underground movement, but commercial books about witchcraft published in the 80s and 90s, productions like Charmed and The Craft, you've seen those shows, they created a surge in interest in the youth. Now, with the ability to find communities online and the decline in affiliation with traditional religions, witchcraft became more mainstream. Now, the religion is individualistic in many ways. You can do your own thing. It's not signing on an institutional religion. It's not signing on a set of actions or beliefs that you must adhere to. So this person says, I myself grew up with Italian folk magic passed down from generation to generation of practitioners who melded pagan customs with Roman Catholicism. This kind of syncretism is not uncommon in witchcraft even till this day. Okay? Please pay attention. And these people petition demons and devils and all sorts of stuff. All right? So I find it all so interesting. Laverne said, yes, the craft backfired on them too. Yes, it did. Okay, Stacy said hocus pocus. All right. Yep. Terry Hartfield said this country went to hell and on its way to Hades. Okay. Love always says they play now and pay later. Absolutely. So with that all been said, beloveds, I'm going to conclude this broadcast. I hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow at 6:15 because I'm going to have a guest on here. And as I told you, we're likely going to be talking about spiritual cloning and some other things. Okay. So I hope you all enjoyed it. And I hope you have a blessed rest of your day. Each one teach one. That's how we grow and thrive. Do something productive, constructive, but never destructive. And always remember, beloveds, to keep the Most High first in your lives. Until next time. Peace. you.